Good evening and welcome to the final lecture in the 2017 public lecture series on the Wisconsin idea, past and present. The lecture series is part of a course being taught by the Department of Sociology at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. I am Eric Sandgren, a professor at the School of Veterinary Medicine, and I have the honor to serve as the instructor of record for this class in this semester. Students taking the course for credit, please sign in. And I also would encourage you to be certain to respond to the course evaluation that will be sent to you. As is fitting for the Wisconsin idea, we need information from you so we can better meet your needs next year. The Wisconsin idea has always been about more than training students for the workforce. It meant, as Adlai Stevenson once put it, a faith in the application of intelligence and reason to the problems of society. The aspiration to light the way of Wisconsin's citizens and government with the best torches of knowledge and understanding that the university can provide. Accordingly, this lecture series and the course with which it is associated are aimed to bring students, staff, and faculty in the UW system into a broad conversation with the citizens of the state about how the knowledge produced at the University of Wisconsin has benefited the public in the past and continues to do so today. I encourage you to participate actively through our course website at www.wiscidea.com. If you would like to contribute to this project, please consider making a contribution to the Wisconsin Idea Course UW Foundation Fund. You can do so through the course website. We are fortunate to continue and end our series tonight with a lecture by Garry Golden, Back to the Future. And like all of our speakers, he's graciously donating his time and expertise free of charge out of a commitment to public service. And to introduce our final speaker, we have our very own first speaker, Gwen Drury.
Hold the applause, please. Okay, so my little introduction here is entitled, "It Takes a Long Time for Things to Happen Suddenly." Not a quote I heard that from an architect, but I just thought it applies to so many things, especially this. So when I was first trying to find out what the Wisconsin idea was and how it came to exist, the thing that struck me was that though I was studying the past of over 100 years ago, the concept and the people that I was studying were intensely focused on the future. The Wisconsin idea is about the future. Those people were faced with a tidal wave of change driven by the emerging technologies, economies, and social structures of their time. They felt that the present that they were in was in a collision course with the same things that had collapsed previous great civilizations in ancient times. Corruption, inequality, and a culture that reinforced both as normal and a necessary part of life. In my talk at the beginning of this fall's course, I mentioned that one of the reasons that we don't have a clear and easy definition of the Wisconsin idea is that it had emerged as a concept from a perfect storm of events. The timing of those events coincided with particular populations living in Wisconsin and with particular personalities who ended up in pivotal positions. It took a long time to develop, but all of those factors suddenly produced an approach so powerful we had to give it a name, and it was called the Wisconsin idea. I mentioned that some of the sound bites that we have come to accept as shorthand substitutes for a definition don't actually provide that much guidance, especially not when taken out of context. For instance, what does the boundaries of the university or the boundaries of the state really mean? It clearly meant one thing at a time when the state was the sole or even the major funder of its only state university. At that time, this shorthand might have come close to being a definition. But in a time when the state contributes 15% of that same university's budget, that doesn't seem to fit. And if we're talking about national or international influence, discussing the boundaries of the state doesn't seem to fit. We need to understand the why of this in order to crystallize a definition. And for that, of course, I totally recommend my lecture from the beginning of the course. But in case you don't want to rewatch that, I'll go ahead and give you my definition here, and I saved it till the end of that other one if you do want to go back and just see that part. I say that the Wisconsin idea developed as an approach to making solid, tested, reliable knowledge of all kinds available to the people of Wisconsin to ensure that they would have the means of keeping their own governance and their own economy in their own hands, rather than in the hands of outside or outsized interests. So we've had lots and lots of different topics this fall, wide-ranging topics. And tonight, in our last public lecture, we are going to talk about the future of the Wisconsin idea. Again, it's always been a very future-focused concept. Garry Golden, UW-Madison class of '98, I met him when he was an undergrad, studied here, and he got a degree in political science, South Asian studies, and a certificate in integrated liberal studies. He was a busy guy. He then went on for professional training in future studies at the University of Houston. As a professional futurist, Garry helps organizations in many different sectors all over the country to identify developing trends in society and to envision multiple scenarios for their industries that could result from the combinations of these trends. He doesn't predict the future. He helps groups to prepare themselves for possible multiple or probable futures. So they have a variety of strategies at hand. Tonight, Garry will provide some background framework for our conversation, and since this is the last public lecture of this series, he will turn the conversation over to us to explore possible futures for the Wisconsin idea. As we begin these conversations, I ask that we each make it very clear whether we are thinking or talking about the future of higher education or about the future of the Wisconsin idea. They are related but not interchangeable concepts. So please welcome Mr. Garry Golden.
All right. Thank you, Jeff. All right. So, first, thank you for having me. One of the things I'd like to do at the beginning of my talks is lose control and to activate the room a little bit. So we're going to be together for about another hour. We're going to be sitting much of that time. So if you would just indulge me, if everyone just kind of stand up and let's just get activated and give me your jazz hands, spirit fingers, something. We can play jump around. And give me a big smile, right? Give me a big smile, and then turn to your neighbor with that smile and say, what a beautiful smile you have. Fantastic. It's a safe place. And then when you're done, you can end in the downward dog position. All right. Okay. So I actually want to begin by turning the floor over to you a little bit. I want you to imagine in front of you of two buckets, right? And these are going to be buckets that can expand exponentially. The bucket on the left is going to be filled with all the changes that we saw in the world that shaped the state of Wisconsin and the university system over the past 50 years. That's a lot of time, right? Typically with clients I do 5 or 10. But we're really looking out at the future here tonight. So think about all the changes that happened over the past 50 years, global stage down to the state of Wisconsin, and put that in the bucket on the left. And then on the bucket at the right, imagine all the changes we're likely to see, again, at that global stage, down to the local communities in Wisconsin, all the changes we're going to see over the next several decades, 50 years, put that in the bucket on the right. The question is, which bucket is more full? Are we going to see more change in the next 50 years? And if you don't want to go out 50 years, just go out 20 years. But are we going to see more change in the future compared to the past? If so, give me your jazz hand, spirit fingers up so I can kind of get a pulse check of the room. And hold them up high, hold them proud. Great. So a few people did have their hands down, and basically the assumptions there are, of course there will be change in the world, right? And as a futurist, that's critical for business. But there will be change. It's just not going to be as dynamic. That we could, over the next several years and several decades, be entering a period of time where there's just more resistance to change. There's stronger pushback. People are going to put on the brakes and say, enough of this change business, right? So that's a perfectly reasonable set of assumptions to hold, but most of you had your hands up. And before I start speaking, I want to get a sense from you what you think is going to lead to more change in the future than the recent past. And I'm going to play my inner Oprah here with a traveling lavalier mic. So this is the audience participation part of the day. So what changes in the future are going to be more dynamic than the past? Here we go.
Climate change.
Okay. And what about it? Give me the information.
Sea levels rise. A lot of people are going to be displaced from their coastal homes.
Yeah.
There's going to be mass migrations. Food systems are going to be disrupted. Things that we depend on and eat every day are not going to be available to eat anymore in a grocery store. And I don't think we are ready for this at all.
Yeah. So let's begin with something happy. That was fantastic. Well played. And that maybe we'll add arid farming land. So there's implications of climate change effects themselves, and then there are implications of policies designed to alleviate climate change. So both the actual effects and the policies in place are enormous sources of change for food, agricultural farming, energy, urban environments, etc. What else? I'll walk over to that side of the room. Let's stay over here.
Well, this is a downer.
Yeah.
Human communication will become extinct.
Wow. Hold up your little finger if you have something positive, and then wave if it's going to be negative. Human communication will go extinct. I'm going to draw a lesson from that. Maybe that we are increasingly challenged by the pervasiveness of information technology from having kind of face-to-face. I will accept that. The context that I always like to put that in is against what time horizon, right? I think in our world today, you go back to 1880, the number of human beings that the average human being saw in their daily life was on a single hand, right? I don't subscribe to the bowling alone theory. I don't subscribe to we never talk to each other more. We've never been more social in our culture, and that is despite having all of these screens in our lives. So I think that we may be challenged by this pervasiveness of screens, but I think that there is this sense of we're really out in the world more than we ever have been in human history. So there is this dynamic that we need to be aware of technology, especially television still, and mobile devices, and how does it play into the cohesion of communities and social networks. That's a huge area of change ahead.
I don't know what's positive. I'm actually a historian. I don't know if that makes us
You're agnostic. If your historians are neutral.
Well, the way I see it actually is that I think the last 50 years, certainly compared to the 50 years prior to that, we're actually a pretty stable time period. And so it seems like the likelihood is that we're going to enter a period that's going to be a little bit more tumultuous because we're coming out of a period of relative stability. And that it's more likely that the next 50 years will be more like 1917 to 1967.
And give me a source of what could be a potential source of that.
I think global conflict. I think political change.
Great. So global geopolitical change.
We've had demographic changes in Wisconsin where the rural communities have lost younger people, and so they've gotten older. They've gotten poorer, they've gotten less educated. That will accelerate in the coming years.
I actually gave him $20 before the talk began to say that. So demographic transition, in particular rural communities, aging populations in rural communities. Anyone else from this side, please?
I think we're going to see increased collaboration and connectivity.
Fantastic. So, how ideas and best practices spread around the world has never been so fluid, right? So, what does that mean for the future of research, learning, government? Please. And then I'm coming to the other side.
Okay, I think the changes that we're going to see are the result of advances in biology.
Excellent.
We're going to understand how proteins operate in the human body, and we're going to be able to solve all sorts of aging and other problems.
Fantastic. So, toward the end of the 20th century, really the big conversation that people had was, the big framing was, the 21st century is going to be the century of biology, of biotechnology. And I think we've made a tremendous amount of progress in that space. And kind of the biggest changes are still ahead of us. So it's a huge area of change. Over here, I'm going to make some eye contact. Please.
I think our genetics is changing. Yeah. The world itself is getting smaller. So the cross-fertilization of different peoples.
Fascinating.
To homogenize everything.
Fascinating. That's the epigenetics? What is that study? But yeah, that's fascinating, right? Awkward eye contact over here. Anyone have anything? Sources of change for the next 2 decades? Here. Maybe just one or two more. Please.
I think artificial intelligence
There
will
we
be
go.
a huge thing,
There
and
we
I'm
go.
not yet sure if it's going to be more good than bad.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. If I would have had another $20, it would have gone to you for that one. Usually the first person says AI is going to destroy the human species. But information technology, please.
What I've been seeing over a number of the last years is an increase in sort of extreme positions.
Great.
And that something leads up to that. I'm not always sure what it is, but it certainly has consequences.
Yeah. And this, I think, for me, is to build off of yours. This is the real story. We're going to look at eras of communication here shortly, but increasingly more of us live within what's referred to as a filter bubble, right? I'm on this side, I only listen to news and insights that reaffirm that. I'm on this side, I only listen to the echo chamber there. And that has created a context of polarization which inhibits our ability to solve complex problems, right?
Is that at least worth $10?
That was. I'll get you some cake after.
Okay.
All right. So we are going to be spending a lot of time tonight talking about things that are changing in our world. That's what I do for a living. But I want to recognize that the overwhelming amount of things in our society, at kind of the university experience, the human experience itself, will actually not change, right? There are many things in the world that are not going to change. And I do have some parts of me that are like, oh, this information technology is just a complete disaster for humanity. But for the most part, I think, well, like television was the real evil one, not the cell phones. Television was the big one. But I look around the world and we're really, the human side of our existence is strong. It's strong. And when I look out 50 years, I still think that there are going to be little kids running up to you, wanting to sit on your lap with a book, right? Think about how many children's books existed in the world in 1870, 1970 versus today. There are more of them, right? So this desire to be around people, this desire to have things, this desire to be in a place together, it's not going away. It's not going away. So as I start to wax poetic here shortly on technology, realize that I do believe that there's a lot in our world that is not going to change and that it's a foundation for us to rest upon. So these are my two sons when they were a little bit younger, reading to each other. And this is the dynamic that I think will continue for their children, right? Even though they might have a couple robots in the house. The other thing that's going to be big in 50 years is that Batman shirts are still going to be selling off the rack, right? And the cousins are still going to be buying them Badger gear, right? So we're going to talk about things that are changing. In terms of the flow of tonight, I'm going to spend a little bit of time trying to give a foundation of how futurists approach change. Then we're going to look at drivers of change that are happening in our world around demographics, data-driven innovation, and the blockchain, and talk about how those things play in as macro forces around the Wisconsin idea. Right? That's our plan. So professionally, as Gwen mentioned, I am a futurist. And this is one of these job titles that has a lot of baggage, right? There's a lot of eye rolling, like, oh, you're a futurist, right? I'm a nowist, is usually what the person will say. But I come from a world of academically trained futurists. There is a program at the University of Houston that has trained futurists now for over 40 years. And the discipline itself is really rooted in sociology. Futurists are students of social change. And the field of foresight is vast, and it includes systems thinking and scenario planning and all sorts of stuff. But essentially, I am in the world of understanding how society changes. Now, my private sector kind of corporate clients are concerned about social change, but really what they're trying to figure out is what are the market transitions that we need to be prepared for? What is the transition that's going to occur in my industry that I need to be focused on? And when we talk about industry level transitions, the model that's most often used by futurists and strategists and other fields is this notion of the S-curve, kind of this elongated shape S. And within the S-curve, we can describe an era, right? A period of time in which there's continuity. The rules remain the same, the conditions remain the same within that given era. And the first phase is basically what we would characterize as slow change, right? It's emerging. So think maybe like personal computers in the 1970s or 80s, right? And it's during this time period when we tend to underestimate what's likely to happen, right? We see it, we go, oh, I see these personal computers are happening, but why do I want to do math at home, right? This personal computer revolution is not so good for me. So we underestimate that amount of change or the impact of the change that's likely to happen. Then through a number of different factors, adoption, improvements to the technology platform, we enter a period of rapid change. And it's during this period with the PC revolution, it was like the 1990s, right? It was just personal computers coming off the assembly lines, it's like crazy. Everyone was getting a computer. And what did we do during that period of time of rapid change? We overestimated the impact. We said, this is going to transform everything. We're going to have a paperless office. How'd that work out? Right? There's more paper in offices now than before, right? So we overestimated the amount of change, and then eventually what happens is everyone gets a computer. The innovation within that platform reaches a point of diminishing returns. You can't innovate within that era anymore because you're kind of at the top of the innovation cycle. So you reach this point where you're at a plateau. Right? And then as a futurist, you want to understand what's the disruption? What's the thing that's going to happen that's going to disrupt that era? And in the world of personal computers, right, it was the cell phone. It was the portable computer. So futurists want to understand how the world is changing around era-based transitions. This is really the fundamental task of foresight. So if we just look at a couple era-based transitions in our society as kind of examples. We did not go from walking on the savannas of Africa to walking on the moon by walking faster, right? The history of human civilization has been based on various eras of transition around mobility and transportation. Now, one of the things that we see in this story is that the previous eras don't go away, right? Even though I flew here, right? Still walk, we still drive, we still use trains, we still use boats, but those previous eras aren't the source of discontinuity. They're not the source of dynamic change in our society, right? There's a new train in the world, nobody gets really excited, right? So in understanding the future in terms of era-based transitions, we need to recognize that the old era does not go away. It just simply ceases to become the source of dynamic change in our world. So in the world of transportation and energy, what's next? There are a few transitions. There's electrification around batteries and fuel cells. There's the era of self-driving cars. There's an era of low-volume production of vehicles. There's an era of suborbital travel where you could get into a plane in Madison, fly up above the Earth's atmosphere, have the Earth go underneath you at 20,000 miles an hour, and land in Tokyo in 90 minutes. Land in Sydney in an hour and a half, right? So what futurists are doing in their analysis of eras is paying attention to what's going on. We're paying attention to signals of change and trying to understand where are we in this S-curve. So identifying and monitoring change is what futurists spend most of their time doing. So in the world of autonomous cars, which is a very kind of timely topic in our world these days, the first real signal of this era we're in now was in 2004 when the U.S. military basically looked around the world and they said, we have too many soldiers dying delivering supplies into the field. So we want self-driving platoons delivering those supplies and not humans. So they paid a bunch of college student teams to basically develop these very expensive self-driving cars and ran 3 Grand Challenge races. And after the 3rd Grand Challenge race, all of the cars completed the course, and the military said, great, we're done, and they shut it down. And then a few years after that, Google came out with headlines saying, we've got self-driving cars, they've got 100,000 miles on them already in Silicon Valley, and everyone started going, Google as a self-driving car project? And then Ford started getting involved, and basically over the past few years, we have just seen an acceleration in the commitments and intentions of companies to bring self-driving cars into the mainstream world. Just a few weeks ago, General Motors announced it will have self-driving fleets in the world in 2019, right? So as a futurist, I want to help people understand where we are in that curve so we can anticipate the big changes that happen during the rapid era of change, right? So that's what futurists do. I just want to kind of wrap this up with a couple big picture stories because these mean a lot to the scientific research and industrial potential of the state of Wisconsin, right? The eras of manufacturing have been based off of natural materials, clay, stone, metals, plastic, silicon. These are all era transitions that have defined our world. So when you say, what's the future of manufacturing in the state of Wisconsin? Well, you don't want to be playing off of the plateau of the old eras. You want to be investing in nanoscale materials, biomaterials, additive manufacturing processes. If we want to understand what will come as a contribution from research and engineering across the UW system, it's going to be based off of the new era of materials manufacturing. So final one then is media and communication, right? For the majority of human existence, we just had a one-to-one format. Like if I wanted to exchange information to you, I had to speak to you or hand you something, right? And in the political world, one-to-one was still filled with a lot of lies, right? You go to the Lincoln Museum in Springfield, Illinois, and you walk through the halls, they were handing out fake news, right? Lincoln beat Trump to the fake news bit, right? Fake news was rampant in the one-to-one era of communication and media. And then we entered the broadcast era of mainstream radio, mainstream television. And oh my goodness, the stress and the negative thoughts of one entity being able to control a message and broadcast that message to the masses that happened during that transition. That caused a lot of social stress, right? And then the era transition that we've basically been in for about 10 years is the era of social media, where many people communicate, edit, share information, stories and communicate it to many other people, right? But that's not the end. Futurists are now looking at what's next. It's, device-to-device communication. My car talking to the other cars, right? It's intelligent assistants. In a few years, many of us in this room are going to have like an IBM Watson assistant, a better Siri, maybe. And other intelligent assistants will be communicating to our intelligent assistants, right? It's going to get pretty weird. So these are era transitions ahead that are going to influence our ability to communicate the innovations and potential changes in our world associated with work across the UW system. So when I think about the future context of the Wisconsin idea and just the ability for the state to thrive in the future, it rests on our ability to navigate these era transitions, right? If we're gonna do well in the state, across the state in healthcare, we need to move from what is often referred to as patient-centered care, where I get paid for the activity of dealing with that patient, to outcomes-based care, where I get paid for positive health outcomes. And I'm not simply treating a patient, I'm treating a whole population, right? So these are the types of transitions that are happening at the macro level of our society and the economy. Today I want to focus on just a few, right? But before I go in there, I want to just see if there are any questions on what I've presented so far on the foresight piece. And maybe a big smile to give me some nonverbal positives. Please.
I don't have a question so much as a comment, and I would, perhaps this is...
Hold on one second. Because this is being broadcasted.
So I have a comment more than I have a question, and perhaps this is something you'll get to as the lecture goes on. But I would make the case in everything that we've gone through so far in the comments by other audience members that I would say humans have an incredible capacity to succeed at change. While a lot of the things that the gentleman in the front mentioned regarding climate change are obviously worrisome, I would say look at how humans have evolved. We live longer, we have more, food, or too much food. Global, extreme global poverty is a fraction of what it was 25 years ago. So I'll be interested to see as we go on this journey how this concept of, for the most part, humans find a way to make it work.
Excellent. So I would tend to agree. I think the caveat would be that they don't always like doing it at the beginning, right? We do adapt. We are people that adapt. It just is a little difficult at the beginning, right? It's the transitions that are always difficult. But yeah, that is what is unique, is our ability to adapt. And what foresight is all about is basically giving you that ability to anticipate what's coming next, right? And make the right investments sooner rather than later. That's really what futurists are trying to do. So I want to look at a few areas of change, and let's just start with demographics. When you imagine how the future is going to be different, you have to start with people. And really the best way to think about changes in people is at a large scale. And looking at the life stage and lifestyle transitions that are occurring in your society. So thinking in terms of demographics as destiny is kind of core to the futurist mindset. So let's get a sense from the audience of your background demographics. What is this up in front of me? What's it called? Anyone? Population pyramid. This is if you gave me $1 million to go around the world, I would only teach a course on population pyramids, right? So this is a population pyramid, and together as the set, it's called, there are many words, but it's the demographic transition model. The demographic transition model. And what this allows us to do is understand who is in our society in terms of individuals, what stage of life are they in, right? And then when we plot that, we get a better sense of what stage are we in as a society. So for the majority of human existence, when we come back up here, so we're taking just traditional gender right here, right? Male, female, and then this is age 1, this is age 100. So take everybody in your society, in your city, in your county, plot all those individuals, and this is where you get your population pyramid. So for the majority of human existence on this planet, we had this stage 1 population pyramid. This is the period of time where basically we're largely agrarian, rural, pre-modern, pre-city. Women are pregnant basically their whole lives. You have, the worst thing that could possibly happen to an individual is the loss of their child, and every human being on Earth basically experienced that, right? And when people wax poetic about, we should go back to our tribal roots when we respected elders, I'm like, well, there weren't any, right? And you try having 10 kids and 5 of them don't make it past age 5. Like, this was a very challenging stage. And it's during this period where you start to get movement towards the cities, movement away from farming into, a kind of a craft economy, where the big challenge is shifting your social norms. That's the society, right? You need to go from rural to urban. And though this is really the past for us here, when you look around the world today, this is the reality of many people in the world. Billions of people in the world live in this population pyramid. So then what you do is you go into stage 2. Stage 2 is the emergence of larger scale agriculture, farms and factories. You move populations towards the cities. You get a little bit of kind of healthcare. Women become part of the workforce, so you have smaller families, and more people live into their older stages of life. And then if you're lucky and things go well in your society, you enter the third stationary phase, where you essentially have what we would all recognize as a modern economy, largely urban. There's a middle class. Many people live into their middle years, and many people live into their post-65 older stage of life. Now, what happens in a society can go two ways from here. If you have immigration, because families are smaller here, if you have immigration, you're able to sustain this stationary model. If you don't allow immigration in your society, you basically enter the contraction phase, right? Where the smaller families can't basically replenish the society. And at that point, the biggest challenge in your society is protecting the electorate, right? Older electorates tend to go more populist. That's what we're seeing across the world today, right? So this is the contraction phase. So what I want to do now is very quickly walk through kind of the global story, right? If we're trying to imagine the contributions that are likely to come out of the UW system in service and engagement and empowerment to the people of the state and the world, what societies are we going to serve, right? What society transitions are happening? So in the United States, this is our population pyramid, 0 to 100 in the year 2000, 2015, 2030. We have immigration in this country, by most accounts, and we have a fairly stable population pyramid. The thing that I want to point out to you is the most challenging part of our story. And that thing is referred to as a demographic dividend. Demographic dividend. So a dividend, you have stocks, you get a dividend. It's a payout for owning that stock. And what a demographic dividend is, it refers to essentially the social economic benefit, the payout of having lots of people growing up, being educated, being trained, going into the workforce, having a job, raising a family, buying a home, paying for their kids' $40 sneakers every 6 months, and activating the economy. So what happened in the United States in the 1990s is basically the demographic dividend of which generation? The baby boomers. The baby boomers born 1946, 1964, basically kicked in the U.S. economy in the mid-1990s to mid-2000s. That's when they started to earn more money than they ever had before. They had young kids. And then over the past few years, what have we seen with the baby boomer population? They're basically coming out of that demographic dividend period. Their kids are now in college or living in the basement, right? But they're not buying all this stuff for their kids anymore. Their kids are largely grown up. That big house that they bought in the late 1990s is too big now. I don't need it anymore. That big box retail store that we used to go to, I don't need it anymore, right? My family's pretty much grown. Now, I'm a part of the Gen X world. We are half the size of the baby boomer population, hence we don't matter. No matter how many kids we have, no matter how much we make, we do not have the collective impact. We don't bring a demographic dividend to the U.S. economy in the same way. So when I look to the future, the problem that we need to solve is the erosion of our demographic dividend. The pullback of spending of the baby boomers is what I think has really stalled the economy at the highest level, right? So just look, don't think in terms of numbers, just look at the number of people over the age of 65 in the 2000s versus 2030. The last baby boomer is going to turn 65 in 2029. So we haven't even started really the aging wave of the baby boomer population. We haven't really started the aging wave of the boomers, right? Now, the challenge, the gentleman over here, the challenge in the United States is most of our economic output is based in metropolitan areas, which are largely young. And the population pyramid of rural America is essentially an inverted population pyramid. They have lots of people that are older, very few families, and some young kids that keep things interesting. An inverted population pyramid in rural America, for me, is one of the top 3 single most challenging dynamics to confront over the next 50 years, right? So, that was happy. Very quickly, Europe is going through their aging population, and their problem is, go from 2000 to 2030, Europe doesn't have immigration, right? Europe needs immigration. So Europe is aging. They have an inverted pyramid as a continent because they don't have the immigration, the approach to immigration that we do in the United States. But the absolute worst story in the world in terms of aging is China. And after 2040, China will begin aging faster than any population, any society has aged in the past. Sometime around 2045, 2050, there will be more Chinese people over the age of 65 than there are Americans. There will be more 65 plus Chinese than there are Americans. So, you go to Russia, you go to Japan, right? This is all the vodka that the men drink. They all die there in Russia very, very early. Aging populations is our global challenge. It is our demographic challenge. So what are solutions that we might find from the UW system? What might come out of what forces might influence the Wisconsin idea activities of our future? Focusing on 3 terms is really the best way to think about it. The first term is aging in place. Aging in place basically speaks to this idea that we cannot afford to put older people into institutional settings. We can't afford to put the baby boomers into an older person's home. How do we help people age in place, in their own home or with roommates, in shared environments, but aging in place? Creative aging is about the arts. It's about making sure that older people are activated in the mind and in the spirit, right? Doing dance and poetry and arts. And then active aging is just physical activity for seniors. So that is, I think, when I think about UW innovations and policy, technology, systems, those are the big ones. There's a pressing need to professionalize the caregiver fields in our world. Right now, caregivers of senior citizens are largely underpaid, underappreciated. It's not truly at scale a professionalized class or kind of employment class. There is a similar transitioning happening now in early childhood education. Early childhood education used to be like a mom that opened up a child care facility. Now you have to have a master's degree to have a child care facility. That same professionalization of caregivers is likely to be happening. Extending work life, part-tirement. How do we come up with new strategies that help baby boomers stay in the workplace longer than maybe we have in the past? How does Wisconsin expand access to life sciences? And then the very difficult side of social policy and social norms of end-of-life planning, right? I think that is probably your social policy innovation area that needs the most attention. Whew. So that's aging populations, right? That's the challenge, that's the global demographic challenge. But now I want to focus on what's the positive thing, what's the thing to leverage. The other demographic dividends, right? We had a demographic dividend. The Irish had a demographic dividend. Taiwan and Korea had demographic dividends. But other societies are next. So if you look at India, India is a little past this. They're heading into a beautiful demographic population pyramid. Basically, 1 out of 4 service and knowledge workers of the future will be South Asian. They are going to add 250 million service and knowledge workers to the global economy by 2030, right? So South Asia, Pakistan, India, Sri Lanka, Nepal, they have the demographic dividend of the future. And this structure spreads across Southeast Asia in places like Malaysia and Indonesia. You can go across the Middle East, in Egypt and Saudi Arabia. There are different, there are different shapes, different dynamics, but the demographic dividends of the future exist around the globe, right? They may not exist in places we think of all the time, but they exist around the globe. So when I think about those two stories, aging populations and demographic dividends, I think there are going to be a lot of event-driven changes, right? There's going to be a lot of things that are going to happen in our world, and I would encourage you to think about what are those events, right? And how might they play out here in Wisconsin. So you could see the EU dissolve, right? European Union can't sustain itself. You could see China stalling. That would be terribly destabilizing for the world economy. You could see the Middle East, North Africa become the magnet where people go. You could see America become more like Denmark and Finland, right? We could become more European as we expand our safety net. So there are lots of potentials ahead. What I think is needed here in Wisconsin is a serious conversation about what does it mean from the perspective of how we teach students about global demographics as destiny. How do we activate them so they are out there, feeding these demographic dividends around the world, solving problems with the aging population, and how do we get our scientific research community here to accelerate their efforts around food and energy and life sciences, all the things that are needed in society. So that's kind of the big picture. Now, I don't want to spend much time on Wisconsin, but I do just want to do a quick highlight. Wisconsin basically mirrored 1980, 1990, 2000, 2010. It was booming back in the 90s and early 2000s because we had the demographic dividend. So forget about your tax policy to business and how attractive we are to business. It's our workforce is aging. Businesses go where workforces are not aging. They know these charts. So we are basically at the state level seeing a fading in the demographic dividend, and we're seeing an expansion, basically a doubling of the number of people over the age of 65. And across the state, the counties that will experience the fastest aging population growth are basically largely rural, non-metropolitan. So if I'm thinking about where does the Wisconsin idea need to empower local communities and on what subject, rural aging populations is going to be top of the list. So I've done 2 headlines that might bring things to life, things that might come out of the UW system. Look, grandkids, no hands. UW-Madison deploys test fleet of self-driving vehicles for aging populations across the state. Baby Badger boomers praise it for trips to the library, medical points, and fish fry. Right? Fish fry. Thank you, Amanda. That would be transforming the state. Older people don't go out at night if they can't see. They don't go out in the, providing that infrastructure. And a second possible one is that Badger baby boomers basically in 2020, all the older people in the state, they get involved in a microbiome project. So gut flora, testing your gut flora. And that leads to then President Susan Collins, moderate Republicans, we need moderate Republicans, announces a national microbiome project that will transform the quality of life for seniors. That it becomes the microbiome that empowers older people to live happy, healthy lives. Did you see the Daily Alternative Facts headline? Okay. All right. Any questions? Big smile. Hold on one moment. Is it you? Please.
Thanks. So I'm interested in the...
There we go. You're good.
Okay. So I'm interested in the question of geography, and geography not necessarily as a static thing, but as a changing problem. So for instance, if we developed a bullet train from Wausau to Milwaukee, maybe we could get that demographic dividend to a rural county and those kind of things, right?
So it's kind of the question of where does geography and demographics play into each other? And in the case of kind of self-driving cars, which I think I don't think people realize how much our society is going to change around self-driving cars, particularly in rural areas. If you can truly close the gap of geography, if a person can get a job across town because there's a cheap self-driving car to take them there, that changes your ability to have economically vibrant economy. Can I get someone from Wausau to Milwaukee quickly? Absolutely.
Does it change
our
understanding of rural and urban?
Could new transportation systems change rural urban? I would probably say no. I think that rural is rural for non-geographical reasons as well. I think there's a size kind of community approach. But it is something that could transform the state. A new sense of a transportation network could transform the state.
It's striking to me how in a number of contexts DARPA has been very foresightful.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, in view of the suggestions that you're making and the case you're making for forward thinking, are there groups or individuals in the state of Wisconsin now, maybe associated with the university, maybe associated with government, who are looking ahead in a way like that? Or do we really need to start from ground zero?
Yeah, I would say you need to get a futurist in residence. But yes, there are. In a truly focused way, I would say it's probably not as comprehensive as something as like DARPA.
Is it university though?
It's private sector as well, out in Epic and things of that. Yeah.
Okay, so I work in the field of aging.
Okay, oh great.
And until we get on top of the big A, Alzheimer's and other forms of dementia, much of what you said here will not apply. And that's why I applaud Bill Gates for giving $1 billion+. But that dementia is not going to alter self-driving vehicles, healthy, all the way down the pike.
Absolutely. And that was a big missing point in my, and the number of people dealing with dementia and Alzheimer's is only going to increase. I would say that's where the professionalization of the caregiver field is the lever. And I've got my eye on the clock too, so maybe this will be the last one.
I have a question, the way you're projecting in the population into the future. You project it as very stable, but that's not our history. It always, we have plagues, we have wars, we have booming generations. How do you take that into account?
So demographic pyramids themselves tend to be pretty stable. You can have one child per family policies in China that will change the pyramid. You can have wars, famines, plagues can take away folks, but for the most part, these things are fairly, I don't want to say they're accurate, but the characteristics and the projections usually unfold the way you expect them. If we were to have a global pandemic or something, it would change. But I'm more confident in stable projections of demographics than I am on technology and things of that nature. I think it's the place where there's continuity.
We can go into the term.
Okay, great. So, so in Gwen's fantastic lecture, which I highly recommend everyone go back home and watch tonight, she had talked about some of the dynamics, things that were shaping folks that were forming this Wisconsin idea. And it's not that they thought that capitalism was bad or evil. They were really focusing on understanding predatory wealth and predatory capitalism, right? And in Wisconsin and in the nation, it was Standard Oil. That was the big kind of manifestation. And the state of Wisconsin, it was the lumber industry, and there's fantastic stories by Gwen on kind of the cutover fields and how that led to research at the university that spread across the state. In the world at that time, electricity and steam were changing things, and that led to a new aristocracy, new people that had wealth. So my question to you would be, who is this today? Who is this today? Who are the new aristocrats? Who are the new predatory X? Right? Wall Street?
Koch brothers.
Well, we're not going to say particular names, but you know, the list is probably going to be like Wall Street, oil, you know, like I went to school in Madison, I know, right? I'm going to say it's not them at all. It's the technologists are the new target. And if you pay attention to these signals bubbling up, it's the technologists that are becoming the new evil ones, right? They're the ones tearing apart the fabric of society. They're the ones leading to massive wealth disparities, right? So I don't think it's oil or big box retail or Wall Street. I think the next embodiment of this comes from the technology world, right? And that is to say that I'm not making the assertion that the world of technology business is bad, but that there is a predatoriness, there is a super empoweredness dynamic in this space that continues to grow. And the story around that is one that I think creates a lot of challenges, but also opportunities. First, I want to talk about the challenge. So the challenge was embodied in, there was an op-ed written in 2011 by Mark Andreessen. This is the gentleman, he co-developed the Netscape browser in the 1990s at the University of Illinois. He's now a big venture capitalist in Silicon Valley. And in 2011, he wrote Why Software is Eating the World. And it was in 2011 that Mark Andreessen looked around and he said, oh, here's this company called Uber. And Uber is going to transform the world of transportation and mobility. And they don't own a single car. They're a software company. And you just wait. Uber is going to transform how we get around the world. And there's this company over here called Airbnb. And Airbnb doesn't own any rooms, any hotels. They have no physical assets. They're a software company. And they're going to transform how people travel around the world. Right? And they might even have an impact on the rental market in your local city, so you better watch out for that. He looked around, he saw companies that were in the health and wellness space. And they said, these companies are making claims that they are going to lead to more health outcomes than the pharmaceutical companies, and they're not making pills. They're software companies. And there are wealth management companies that are going to better invest your money using an algorithm, not a highly paid wealth management advisor, right? So all these things were happening around him, and he said software is eating the world. And there's certainly some truth to it, right? Software is eating the world, and I think it's also overplayed to a certain degree. My amendment to this is that it's no longer just software eating the world, it's how artificial intelligence and the design for behavior change is eating the world. I think that's the more nuanced evolution of this. So we're looking at a future, and we want to understand the Wisconsin idea and the dynamics of citizens across the state and the world. We need to assume that over the next 5 to 10 to 15 years that software will continue to eat the world, right? And this is going to bring about a change in our world that we've done before. Technology can do certain things. It has a certain capability, but then people say, oh, I don't want to go there just yet. And then we go there, and then technology goes out ahead, and they say, no, and then we follow them. It's a dance, right? So I want to go through that recent dance that we saw emerge in the 1990s around the web. 1993, on the internet, nobody knows you're a dog. Nobody's laughing. Nobody's laughing, right? And in 1993, we would have had a good chuckle, right? In 1993, the World Wide Web came into existence. It was a distribution platform, right? And it blew our minds that we could go online and read this paper document online, right? That really fascinated us in our society. And now nobody is laughing at this cartoon, right? So when the internet knows you're a dog, 15 years later, 273 people know I'm a dog, the rest can see my limited profile. So you're laughing a little bit now, right? But in 10 years, you won't laugh. You won't laugh, right? The internet went from a distribution medium of content to a social environment, right? And that was the transition. And then we want to say to ourselves, what's happening now, right? What's the next era of kind of web experiences? And I think it's this. That what's happening online, what's happening with our experiences online, is that they are designed to drive certain outcomes. More and more of the experiences that we have in our world using web services are about making us healthier, wealthier, and wiser, right? Now, that's not to say that there's lots of terrible stuff on the internet. There's lots of crap out there. But the high bar experience is no longer the web as a distribution platform. The high bar is not the web as a social environment. The high bar is, how are your services making me healthier, wealthier, and wiser? How does my banking application help me save money? That's the outcome I want. How does my Fitbit device or my health device help me be healthier? Right? How does the online course that I'm taking make me wiser? How does the online energy app help me save money? When we think about the Wisconsin idea in the context of innovation, it increasingly becomes about outcomes-based models, driving people toward the outcome they wish to achieve is the bar. So the context of all of this is basically why it's happening is because we're seeing an explosion of data in the world, right? 10 years ago, we saw the beginning of social data, right? We saw the beginning of sentiment analysis. Who likes what? Who is connected to other people? This data did not exist before 2008. Now we have an enormous amount of social data. A few years ago, we saw the emergence of wearable devices, Fitbit devices, things that can measure our brain activity, genetic data. We're seeing now this explosion of health and wellness data that didn't exist 5 years ago. Just now these days, we're starting to see the emergence of place-based data. We're going to see rooms that know where did people sit. Where did they walk in the library? Where did they walk in the dorm? Or we have these heat maps that show us how people are interacting with physical places. This didn't exist several years ago. Now, this doesn't mean that every place has data. This doesn't mean that every person has health and wellness data, but increasingly more and more people do. So as a futurist, I want to go, what's next? And what I think is next is experience data. Experience data. So experience data is basically how we learn, how we grow, what we do, how we perform, right? How we basically, move along in life. So what I want to do here is make a descriptive case that data is growing exponentially, and that if the Wisconsin idea is going to future-proof itself, If the Wisconsin ID is going to remain relevant to the lives of people in this state and around the world, it is going to have to adapt and evolve to this data-driven world. At the same time, I don't want to make data the truth. I want to recognize that data is always a partial view of what's happening, and it's not the gospel, right? So with having said that, I want to introduce something very specific to you tonight. At the risk of getting very specific, this is something that I think is important to our world. So students in the room, learning management systems, LMS. Do you know what that is? An LMS is like Moodle, Blackboard. An LMS is basically the platform that allows us to deliver teachers to students content, courses, discussion rooms. For 15 years, there was a protocol called SCORM that allowed us to use different types of learning management systems. Right? It's called an API. It allows data from one system to communicate with the other, kind of a back-end infrastructure. 5 years ago, there was a request to develop the next generation interface for learning management systems. And that protocol is now referred to as Experience API. Experience API is a way for us to measure and quantify, I did this experiences. I did this experiences. I read this book. I watched this course. I attended this lecture. I took this quiz. So what Experience API helps us do is understand the connection between the instruction that people receive, the training, and their actual real-world performance. And why Experience API was created in the first place is because business leaders said, you're training all these people, you're training all these students, but what do they actually do when they leave the training or classroom? What do they do in the real world? You're not measuring that. So Experience API is about understanding not what happens in the classroom, but what happens in the real world. Big smile, nod your head, make sense? So let's give an example. Lucy read an article about virtual reality for aging populations. She opened up an Evernote folder, because that's how she learns. She watched a YouTube video. She interviewed the director of MIT's Media Lab. She attended an MIT workshop. She wore an aging suit to simulate what it's like to be older. She mentored with the head of innovation at AARP. She designed a new VR space. She demonstrated it. She won a Webby Award. She taught a course. She was hired as head of social VR at Facebook. In our world today, in the world we live in today, the only thing you would know about Lucy in this case would be the last thing. That she was hired as the head of social VR at Facebook. You would have no idea how Lucy got there. Lucy would not be able to tell you the journey she took to get there, right? Experience API is about giving you the capability of showing the experiences that get you to that endpoint. So, and I'm going to wrap up here after this final set. We're not going to do blockchain. So my provocation, we'll do it over cake, is that by 2022, right, experience data will be the most valuable asset in our lives today, right? For the state of Wisconsin, for the students of the university, for employees, the most valuable form of data is going to be their experience data. So if that assumption is true, how are we going to regulate it? How do we deal with the human factors? Not be cold data, but keep the human. And how do we make sense of it? So how we make sense of it is the second part of this story. I don't believe that we're going to make sense of it using tables, rows and columns. For the past 40 years, human organizations have tried to structure information off of rows and columns, right? The Excel database. This is very good for structured data, right? The new way that people are approaching data is around the idea of connections and relationships. And the thing that I want to, for those of you who haven't been introduced to it, but to introduce to you is this idea of graph thinking. Graph thinking. Graph is not bar charts. This is a graph. This is a graph. So let's walk through what a graph database approach to data looks like. Graphs are about understanding connections and relationships to things. They are not structured in rows and columns. They are structured in what's called nodes and relationships between nodes. So Madison is a node, Chantel is a node, Adam's a node. Lives in is the relationship. So Adam and Chantel share that connection to Madison. So let's walk through the experience that graphs give you. So Chantel's a subscriber to the Overture Center. She's also involved in the actor scene. She just started an actors meetup on Facebook. Now Adam has kind of liked liked meetup on Facebook, so he sees there's a new actors group and he likes it. It's kind of interesting. Now Adam likes to go to rock concerts and shows, and he went to a local venue here in Madison, wrote a review of the band. Chantel had liked that venue, so she sees that article, so she likes it. Now, if you are the Overture Center, what does this graph model tell you to do? What's the outcome they're looking for? They want more subscribers. What does it tell you to do? Contact Adam. Because Chantel and Adam share the same stuff. You contact Adam. That's the outcomes for them. And if you're Match.com, you want them to get hitched. There's love there. Right? Graph databases are about understanding connections and relationships and pathways. They happen all the time. We don't learn in rows and columns. We learn by taking leaps and connecting the dots. So 2 years ago, I was cutting a pomegranate, and my little son was like, "What is that?" I was like, "Do you want some?" He's like, "No." And then he had it, and he was like, "I love that." And we started cutting the pomegranate in a really unique way because I found it on YouTube. And we watched this video of how to cut a pomegranate. It changes your life for people that like pomegranates. It changes your life in every way positive. And I learned it on YouTube. And then at the end of that video, there were other little videos, and they were about how you grow pomegranates. And we spent 10, 15 minutes watching these videos of farmers in California growing pomegranate. And then there was another video from India, and we watched this video of India pomegranates. And I was like, Daddy lived in India for 2 years. And then we started watching videos about India. We were taking all of these leaps. And then 2 weeks later, Noah has a class on things that grow. Things that grow. And he comes home and he tells me, "Oh, yeah, we did this thing on things that grow." And in my head, the frustrated futurist is like, "Oh, if he would have had it as experience graph, the teacher could have connected that thing that Noah did with me. And Noah would have been able to connect that experience he had out of the classroom in the classroom." But we don't have that data. We have little kids that say, "I didn't learn anything in school today." Right? So, experience graphs can also tell the journey. This is Bilbo Baggins and the Lord of the Rings graphed. And when you graph stories, when you graph journeys, you can start to ask questions of, where was the ring? Who had the ring before Gollum? Right? You can start to ask these questions around the journey. So instead of thinking of Bilbo Baggins, imagine you're the UW Extension. And the UW Extension has a new person taking courses. And we start to graph that journey. And we start to understand the outcomes associated with that journey. So my thesis is that the whole of society is moving from today, which is about the social graph, who we know, how we know people, what we like, things of that nature, right? 10 years ago, nobody asked for the social graph. Nobody. Now, the social graph is at the center of a nation state overthrowing, influencing an election. And 10 years ago, it didn't exist. My provocation is, should the Wisconsin idea start to orient itself around the experience graph? Nobody knows what it is. Nobody wants it. Will it exist in 10 years? 3 minutes, and then I'm done. So there are people that are doing this today to understand how the world is changing. LinkedIn has what's called the economic graph. And what you can ask LinkedIn is you can say, like, I live in Eau Claire. LinkedIn, who came to Eau Claire over the past 5 years? Tell me the people that moved here. What skills did they bring? Which companies do they work for? And then you can say to LinkedIn, tell me other companies that also have those skills in demand. And then Eau Claire's people are going to go recruit those companies. Does that make sense? LinkedIn knows more about the economy to a certain degree than the traditional economic development folks. My last provocation here is, should we be creating the Wisconsin Idea Graph? Should we create an ability to capture experiences that people have with the university system to understand what they're learning, what they're doing, and how well they've achieved the outcomes they desired to achieve? Should we create those connections? Should we track those outcomes and experiences? And if we do, would we be able to then share the pathways of successful journeys and help people understand the not successful paths? So, the headlines, you could have, UW Extension integrates XAPI into dairy courses, and they're trying to basically link UW Extension classes with outcomes on the dairy farm, and then there's going to be people in Madison that are going to hate it and not want the cows to be plugged in. And then the final one is UW students win the rights to their experience data on campus. Students taking a class at UW, someone taking a class through Extension, who owns that data? University, the employer, or the learner? So I think that it might be the UW students in 2024 that win the Supreme Court ruling, and then a few years later they're going to all donate their experience data to the world, allowing learners to follow in those paths, and then there'll be a massive hacking of the U.S. workforce experience graph, and the older millennials will point their fingers at the younger siblings saying, you should have just stuck with the social graph. You should have kept it simple. All right, I'm done. I'm already over. I'm not going to talk about the blockchain. How many people have heard about the blockchain? How many people are interested in the blockchain? So maybe we do like a webinar. I'm already 5 minutes over, so maybe we do like a follow-up webinar.
We'll figure out something.
Yeah. All right, everyone. I'm sorry for going 5 minutes over. I know that Gwen wants to. Do you want to come up here and kind of guide them and toward the social thing? And thank you all so much too. Thank you for taking